You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima.
Good morning, Allison.
Hey, Justin. How are you?
Well, it's been a busy couple weeks, it feels like. A lot of things going on. We've got Sarah is getting her central line out in a couple days.
That's right.
So that's big news. That's really exciting, but that's going to be a big day.
Yeah. Hospital, right?
Hospital procedure.
Okay.
Yeah. She'll be under, but it's a changing of, I don't know, turning of the page, new chapter. Like it's a big thing. And so a lot to kind of feel and process around that, which we talked about a lot in the last episode.
Yeah, we did.
But that's been happening. Last weekend, we took a road trip to visit friends across the state, which is, it has been 9 years since Sarah has spent a night away from home.
Wow.
And so we took Mosey and we packed up the car and we went for it. And it all went really well. These are friends that we have known for decades.
Yeah.
And they're just the best people. And so they have a farm outside of Spokane. And so just kind of spent the weekend just hanging out with them, just soaking up the company of good friends and their kids. And it was just a great experience. And it went pretty good for, Sarah did well. She had to rest periodically to kind of keep her energy. But I think for both of us, it went better than expected. So that also feels like it opens up new possibilities for us too. Yeah.
So I remember early on in our friendship, which was just a couple years ago, you talking about it was a good day if Sarah walked across the house.
Yes. Yeah.
From one side. And I've been in your house. It's not like it's this palatial mansion, right? It's from one side of the house, that was a really big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And now you went on a road trip for the weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, they are not big enough bells to ring for this situation. Do you ever stop and pinch yourselves, or has it happened so gradually that you're just like, oh yeah, now we're going to go on a road trip?
No, I think that we still do feel like, wow, this is really happening. There have been significant changes and things are improving, and it's it's something. There's a piece of it too that I don't know, maybe in the future we can talk about this sort of, it's as she am I less of a caregiver? There's less things for me to do. How does my role feel different? And that changing things, can I still call myself a caregiver? Well, yes, obviously, there's still a lot that I'm doing, but as your person is, if that is the case and they're improving, I don't know, there's that can feel like a transition or space sometimes.
Sure. Yeah. But I would guess, and you're right, we should do a whole episode just on this, but that the preparation, the mental, gymnastics that you probably went through, and I would guess maybe the anxiety you felt in preparation for that trip was totally different than, your neighbor next door, who, if they were going to go on a trip with.
Oh, yeah. We overpacked quite a bit. We planned for a lot of contingencies, and I had an enormous amount of anxiety leading up to it. A lot of it centered around how the dog was going to do too. She's not used to 6 hours in a car, but we got some medication and she did great too. So that was good.
Wow.
So that's been happening.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. And then also I started a new round of TMS over the last, I don't know, probably several months, maybe. I don't know exactly, but more so in the last month or so, my depression has been getting worse. And so hoping to kind of turn things around a little bit there. It helped some last time around. And so we're giving it another try, seeing how it goes. And so I've only had 2 sessions, but it's, again, now I'll have this thing every day that, is another thing to do. It's not the most comfortable thing. At least initially, it hurts. And so sitting through that and just really wanting it to improve how I'm feeling. And it gets back to, how much do you hope that it's going to work versus trying to be realistic and remembering that, this isn't the final option. There are other things to potentially try beyond this. So it's not this has to be the last thing. this is the last thing. And if it's not this, then like, what am I going to do?
Right.
But it's, just going through that as well. And that's been, hasn't been easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with me. I think it's all, there's so many factors, right? And so before you were like in a really different space and you were about to, have this break, and now it's like almost winter. You know what I mean? I just feel like there's so many factors involved in everyone's well-being and mood that it's so hard to know, like, well, last time this meant this, but this time it might mean something different. And also it's like gray and rainy all the time, I would guess. And you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that impacts you. For sure it impacts me, but like, it does. So it's hard to, I wish that it could just be like, okay, here's the formula, this is how this will happen. And unfortunately that's not that, but I'm glad that you've got a lot of tools in your toolkit.
Right. Yeah.
That you can just be trying at different times to see what works. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. And so then sandwiched in between all of that, we had Thanksgiving. So
yes.
So it's been a busy few weeks. A lot going on. We got the holidays coming up. So what about you? How's your life been going since we last talked? It's been a little bit.
Yeah, it's been pretty good. I mean, I don't hate to say that, but it's one of those knock on wood kind of situations. Sean's been doing really well. We actually had a day when we were going to go in for Mohs procedures, which are those terrible skin cancer things, and got there and between Sean and the doctors, they were like, we're not so worried about this spot anymore.
Wow.
And so they just froze it and sent us home. And so we thought we were going to be there all day for like terrible bloody mess. And it was like a 10-minute appointment. And we were like, wow, really? So that was pretty incredible.
Great. Yeah.
And we too just had Thanksgiving, and I often, for who knows what reason, but often get sick at Thanksgiving, and I did not. A lot of the people in my family, my relatives, were all coughing, but I managed to do all right. And so it's helping me kind of reflect on a year ago at this time. I was just sort of starting to, I've talked a lot about like, I quit the big job, and then the Tupperware of emotions opened up. And then I had this year of like, blah, what am I feeling? And I feel like Thanksgiving was sort of the beginning of those hard times last year. And so it feels really good to, sometimes those calendar dates can be really challenging. Like I was a little scared about Thanksgiving coming up and being like, last year I was like a hot mess. And how am I going to be this year? But instead I was feeling so great this year that the calendar point was kind of a lovely thing to be like, oh, wow, look how much like more grounded and settled I feel this Thanksgiving than I did last Thanksgiving. Yeah. So that felt pretty good.
That's great.
I know. I'll take it. Yeah. So something I've been thinking about. So at the time of this taping today, we're coming to the end of November.
Yeah.
And November has been National Family Caregivers Month.
Right.
So something that I spent a lot of time thinking about through my role at Negative Space when the month started was like, you see different organizations send an email or do a thing, and you're like, what do caregivers really want?
Yeah.
Like what would make caregivers feel really supported, really seen during this month? I mean, always, right?
Right.
But during this month, because, my mission at the Negative Space is to change the way caregivers are seen and supported, because I think we both know that they're not often seen.
Yeah.
And so it really helped me I kind of did a dive into like, what does that mean? And sometimes you hear someone say something in any context, say like, oh, I just felt so seen. And it's such a powerful phrase. And I just thought that maybe we could talk today about what does that mean as a caregiver? What does it mean when we're not feeling seen? And what are some of the repercussions of that? But then also, what would it feel like? Because if I'm a supporter and I realize, oh, shoot, caregivers are not feeling seen, I might be like, how do I see them? Right. What do I do?
Yeah.
So anyway, that was something I was hoping that we could maybe talk about today. And so I'm thinking for you, when you think about what are moments or times maybe, or what has it felt like for you in times of not feeling seen in your role as a caregiver?
Yeah, I think one of the times that jumps to mind is like the period when Sarah was in bed all of the time. I was taking care of her. I was working full time. And I wasn't sharing much with anyone about what was going on.
Yeah.
And I don't want to make that seem like I'm blaming myself for not feeling seen, because there's a lot of other stuff going on there. But even things like, you would go to the grocery store and it's like you feel this weight of everything that's going on in your life. And you just see people around you and seemingly just going about their day, and you assume that, they're not facing these same hardships. And you just feel this contrast between this weight, all these weights that you're carrying, and just people around that seem to be carefree and oblivious to what you're facing. And that's not to say that I expect everyone in the grocery store to know what's going on in my life, but it's just, I remember those moments of just, it would be, and sometimes it would be at a gathering, and sometimes it could be at work, because that was, I was going to work every day, but I wasn't talking about, this is what the rest of my life looks like. And so those are some of the starkest moments, I think, of just feeling invisible, feeling like your life is just in this other place that just is so at odds with what everyone else appears to be facing. And I think that, we'll get into, how to feel more seen, I think, later on here. But if we could know that a lot more people than we think are going through similar things. And culturally, we just don't talk about that. And so in those moments, like, it's just, you don't think that, oh, that person might be, caring for their parents, or, all of that. It just feels like you're the only one in it.
Yeah. Whew, you just said so many beautiful things. Thank you for sharing all that. Yeah. I posted something this week about feeling lonely in a room full of people.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think sometimes that can mean, like when you said you're at the grocery store, like, it's not like you know anybody there. Right.
Well, it's a small town. So maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe. But I think you're right that, like, at the grocery store, you're looking around, and it's like, look, there's a husband with his wife who is well enough to go to the grocery store with him.
Right.
And that can make you be like, don't they know that I can't do that?
Yeah.
Don't they know, and so, again, not blaming people, but it's just like you said, that contrast of what you see. So sometimes it's just in spaces that sort of paint a picture of what our life isn't.
Yeah.
That can make us feel really unseen. Or like even like media, right? Like you're watching commercials, or you're watching whatever, and you're watching TV, and you're like, none of these people look like me. Like, I don't see any caregiving on here. I see these happy couples off doing their thing, and they're both able-bodied climbing a mountain, So I think you're right that one of those buckets is just in public with people we don't know. But another one is with maybe at work, like you said. So maybe you haven't shared with people at work, and you do know people, but they don't know this part of you.
Right.
And there's lots of reasons to not want to share that. Like, some people do share it, some people don't. And either is fine. But again, you can be sitting in your lunch break and hearing someone say, oh man, my life is so hard because, my kid's teething.
Right.
And you're like, okay, cool. And not that that's not a hard thing, but it can just feel like that's the hardest thing you got going on now, friend. Or like what my post was about too, was about, like, in a room full of your relatives.
Right.
Or your friends. So, I mean, let's talk about that, because I think that in some ways can feel the most challenging, the most hurtful, is when you're with people who know you. Yeah. And they do know your situation, and you still feel unseen and invisible. Right. Right. Like, when you think about that, like, what does that bring to mind for you?
Yeah. I think about, sometimes they'll ask how the person you're caring for is doing. How's Sarah doing? And that's all of the questions, all of the concern, all of the inquiry is directed on that. And it's like, well, I'm also part of this. Right. Right. And, how am I doing? Yeah. So that focus on the person who is sick versus recognizing the caregiver in those situations, I think that's one. And then I think there's other times where there's no mention of any of that. And that's hard. And sometimes it feels like that's could be because it's just been going on for so long that it's like, there's nothing new for me to share. It's the same. The status is the same as it's been for 2 years. And so, whether people don't keep asking. I don't know all the reasons, but it's like for to be in a space like that and for there to be just no acknowledgement that of maybe, and it could be for me to go to a gathering, back when things were really hard. Not that things aren't still hard sometimes, but when Sarah was bedbound,
yeah.
Like I would have to do things to prepare for me to be gone, to set her up so that I could be gone for an hour or two for something.
Yeah.
And so like no acknowledgement of like that. And and like, she's maybe not going to be doing as well because I'm not there. And like that, my mind is back home and not really present. And there's just a lot going on in those situations. And when everyone's just talking about things that feel much more mundane.
Yeah.
It's that same feeling of just that contrast of it feels like everyone's life is going smoothly and without problems. And it's just like, well, I'm way over here. And we're not talking about that. And we're not acknowledging that.
Yeah. And I think even when you talk about like family gatherings for them to just, and I'm not saying this about your specific family, but for people or friends or family to say like, oh, we're going to do this thing and it starts in an hour, or, something that like just isn't realistic for families like ours can make us feel unseen. Like if they're just like, oh yeah, well, we're all going to do this thing and we're going to hike to this place or we're going to do this and or whatever. And we have to be like, you really don't what? Do you see how that doesn't work for us?
Yeah.
And so sort of that piece of the like, okay, so you do know about my situation, but you're not taking it into consideration, or you don't know enough about it, or it's not coming to your mind for you to factor that in when you think about me. Right. So if we think about those things, I want to think about sort of like the repercussions of that. Right. So like, let's say you go to your gathering and somebody, let's say like nobody asks about, they only ask about Sarah and they don't acknowledge your role at all.
Yeah.
So then what do you think is like an outcome of that? Like what happens next? What's the change? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So going to a thing, and if no one acknowledges my role, they maybe just inquire about Sarah. I think that could feel hurtful. That can feel isolating. It can make you feel like, it can even make you feel like you're over emphasizing what your role is. Like you're here feeling like I'm a caregiver, but like if other people aren't acknowledging that, you're like, wait, is my role that important?
Yeah.
That could be part of that. I think too, just if you're in a situation where you're not feeling like you're being asked how you're doing or you're being acknowledged, it doesn't make you want to go back.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure. So let's keep playing this out. So let's say you don't want to go back and you're suddenly starting to think like, okay, I guess maybe my role's not that important because nobody's asking. Okay. So then what?
Yeah. I think you withdraw. Maybe you're not going to, I think, reach out for help as much.
Right.
It's not going to, the groundwork isn't laid to where it feels like maybe those people, whether it's friends or family or whoever, are understanding that you need the help. And so if it feels like they're not acknowledging that, or you're not feeling seen as or known as a caregiver, then it feels like there's this barrier for where if you're going to ask for help, you have to like establish that first. And that's additional friction. And it, we've talked about why and how it's hard to ask for help in the past. And like having as little friction there as possible is kind of what can make a big difference. And so any little thing that makes it, oh, now I got to do that to ask for help makes that harder.
Okay. So now you're not asking for help.
Yeah.
So then what happens?
You're trying to do it all on your own. You're feeling more isolated and lonely, and you're going to burn out.
And you're stopped going to the gatherings, right?
Yeah, potentially.
So
maybe you're going, but you're just not, you're going begrudgingly, or it's, it's just could be pulling you away from that relationship, which, to, I think, do well in caregiving, whatever that I don't know what that means exactly, but like we need the support of the people around us.
Yeah.
Like we can't do it, or we shouldn't do it all on our own.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've talked lots about what it means when we get burnout, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both for us as humans and also for the people we care for.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't want this all to sound dramatic, but I think it's important for us to think about like the domino effect that can happen when a caregiver feels unseen.
Yeah.
Right. So let's flip the script here and let's start talking about like, okay, what does that mean though? Right. So if I'm listening and I'm a supporter and I'm like, okay, I want to see them.
Yeah. Right.
How?
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm thinking about, when I think about what it means to feel seen, I think about recognition, like a recognition or acknowledgement of like, whoa, like sort of and it doesn't have to be understanding, right? Because people can't always understand what it looks like, but it's just a acknowledgement of like, oh, this must be a lot, or it must have taken you a lot to get here today. Or the acknowledgement of like, if it's like, okay, we're going to get together as a family, we're going to take a hike, but we know that might be hard for you. And so therefore we'll take this path that has a blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like some sort of acknowledgement, recognition. And then I think the other arm of that I think about is support. Yeah. Right. So giving that support, whether that's verbal or actions or whatever that is, but that's kind of the two arms that I think about when I think about being seen. Are there other arms that you would add to that besides those two?
I mean, I think this is one that's harder for anyone listening to like influence in a big way. But I think a thing is that the cultural context or the cultural norms of caregiving not being something that's seen in media much.
Yeah.
Or just generally it's one of those topics of conversation that doesn't get talked about as much. Yeah. And so it doesn't feel like it's normalized. And like I said, when I'm in the grocery store and I'm feeling like I'm the only one going through all of this and like everyone else is just living their happy lives, like that is not true. Like the odds that there is another caregiver in the grocery store at the same time as me is probably extremely high.
Oh yeah.
But we don't know that. And it's not that it should, I don't know how that gets fixed, but I think it's whatever you can do to normalize talking about caregiving or, and if you're in a position to do something about that, great, try to do that. But I think that will always be a piece until that changes.
There's this, I'm sure I've mentioned them before, but Caring Across Generations is this really phenomenal organization. And they do just a lot to bring caregiving into media and all of those things. And they actually get to consult on things. Like, so we talked a while ago, This Is Us had this like really powerful caregiving episode and a whole storyline, but one that was really around caregiving. And they got to consult on that, which was great. So they're trying to do that work. But what I wonder is like, in times, especially I feel like when I get together with relatives, especially relatives who are still in my hometown, I feel like a lot of time gets spent talking about all the ailments of the people that we used to know. You know what I mean? Did you hear this person has this? Did you hear this person has this?
Right.
And so even to bring up like in those conversations, like, well, then how's who's caring for them? Like, how do you think their wife is doing? Or how do they, because we talk so much, like that's the kind of thing that just comes up, especially at family gatherings. Did you hear that so-and-so has cancer or whatever? And so that's our in. Right? Like, oh, I wonder how that's impacting their family.
Yeah.
I wonder what are the ways that we could support their family during this time. And, who's have you asked about how their spouse is doing? You know what I mean? Like we can sort of start that conversation ourselves, Yeah. I think I asked some caregivers, like what were some things that have happened to them that made them feel seen? So a couple of examples. One is a caregiver who has a niece who's in high school. And when the caregiver's two sons were diagnosed with the disease, the niece started like a bake shop.
Oh, wow.
And did this bake shop her whole senior year and then donated every cent of the profits to the organization that does research for the disease.
Wow.
Yeah. So here's an 18-year-old who was like, I want to do something, but what can I do?
Right.
And did this thing, like used her skill set and then gave money to that organization. And I will say personally, like when someone says like, I'm having a birthday party, I don't want gifts, but my dear friend Sean has this disease. And so if you'd like to make a gift, donate to the Fanconi Anemia Research Fund.
Mm-hmm.
Or if we get like a thing that says, here are people who made donations in your honor this month or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
That is, yeah.
Because here's what that tells me. That tells me they know the name of his disease.
Mm-hmm.
They care enough to know that like a donation to this is going to be significant for us, both meaningful, but also that it hopefully creates change, right? It's going to do some research that might save his life.
Yeah.
That they did the research to figure out like, what's the name of that organization? You know what I mean? Like, that's a lot of steps.
That is.
And that is hugely significant. And so even for like birthday gifts or whatever, sometimes people do that. We made a donation to Fanconi Anemia Research Fund in your name. Beautiful. Thank you. That just shows so many layers of support and of being seen for that. So that was one. And I think that one that goes along with that too is when people do research.
Yeah.
When people say like, so I looked up your person's disease and I did a little research and to help me better understand what you're going through.
Right.
Because it's hard when someone says, I don't mind too. It depends on the season, I guess we're in. But if someone wants us to be the educators, right? But if they're at home spending the time researching it, oh man, that makes me feel seen.
Yeah.
To be like, you realize this is a big enough deal that you want to learn more about it so that you can better support my family.
Yeah.
You're spending your free time on this thing so that you can gain the knowledge to better support my family. That's beautiful.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a couple more, but before I go on, do you have any you want to interject?
You know, there's, as far as when I've felt seen, there is, I mean, we've talked about it, but there are those moments when someone asks how I'm doing. Like, how am I doing? That just always means a lot. It can be a really small thing. And then there have been big things like when we needed to move and friends showed up, helped us pack up everything, helped us move everything. And I was overwhelmed and they kind of took the lead. And like, you can show up in big ways. And that was, you know, knowing that I, in my role, was in over my head and needed people to kind of just do stuff. And that was incredible.
Yeah.
So it can be small things. It can be big things. Yeah. Like you said, if someone has done some research so that when they talk to you, you don't feel like you have to be in that educational role.
Yep. That
they understand what your person is dealing with so that you as a caregiver don't have that one more thing on your plate to like try to convey that. That's taking something off your plate in a way. That can be great. I think continually getting invitations to things, even if they know that it's maybe difficult or I might not be able to come to something. And maybe expressing that, like saying, hey, I know you might not be able to make this, but we'd love to see you there. This is what's happening.
Yes.
That feels great.
Yeah. I think the combination of those two things, right? Yeah. Like not just the inviting, because then that can be like, oh, I can't.
Right.
People want to be included, but you also want that opportunity to be to opt out. Right. And so if they say like, but no pressure, we totally get it if you can't come. And if you can, it would be great to have you there. So I think it's the both and of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then if for a long time I'm not able to come, like, don't stop inviting me.
Yeah.
Like, the invitation always means something, even if we both know that I'm not going to be able to make it.
Yep.
Because it makes it feel like I was thought of, that I was wanted to be there. They want to see me, even if it's not going to work out. Yeah.
You just said something that struck me. You said I was thought of.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of it, right? Like sometimes we can be so in the shadows because we're, you know, we might be homebound or whatever that is. And just to be, and we might not be able to go to those social things. And so just to know that we were being thought of. And I think that's the thing, is like when you see someone made a donation or you see someone did something, it's like they were thinking of me.
Yeah.
And that's huge. That feeling like, oh, wow, somebody's over there thinking of me, like that feels amazing. I know I've told this story before, but it's worth repeating, that there's a woman who lives a couple blocks away who used to be a caregiver for her daughter. And she knows I love Lay's potato chips. And every once in a while I open my front door and in between the door and the storm door is a bag of Lay's potato chips. And it's not like, oh, something big just happened, I'm going to give her a chip. It's just, you know, and I'm like, oh, Diane was thinking of me when she was at the store and saw the potato chips, you know? And so that's cute. That makes me feel seen.
Yeah.
It's huge.
another thing in a similar vein of feeling thought of is when we're having a difficult day, or, maybe there's a procedure that we're bringing our person to and kind of needing to do more stuff to make that happen, and all the preparation that goes into that, and the dealing with the aftermath and all of that, to get a note on a difficult day like, hey, I know you've got this thing going on, and I'm thinking of you as this is happening, and I know that there's going to be hard days ahead as your person recovers and as you're exhausted. To get that, just those little notes mean a lot.
Well, and you are the best at that, by the way. You are a beautiful model of that.
Thank you.
But I think you're right. Instead, number one, that people remembered the date, which again, you're very good at that. But that people are like, oh, it's like, I know that today was the day that your person's having this procedure. I'm thinking of you.
Yes, exactly.
Sitting there in that waiting room.
Yep.
I'm thinking of you, and not just like, I mean, it feels beautiful that someone remembered that he's having the procedure, but for them to realize like, I'm thinking of the impact this day might have on you today. Like, oh, thank you. Will you tell this? I know you've told it before, but it's my favorite. The story of the friends who like went to the cafe and invited you, but you couldn't go. And then they like brought you food. I don't remember.
Oh yeah. No, I just had some friends that were going and getting breakfast, and they invited me, and I was like, I'm not going to be able to do that. And then I got a message back like, well, hey, can I get some takeout for you and Sarah and bring it over? And so he did, and it was a small thing, but it was also a really big thing.
Yes.
Just a treat, and just like feeling part of it without being able to attend, and feeling thought of and cared about. Yeah.
And the creativity in that, of like, I mean, not that it's that creative, but instead of just being like, well, they can't come again.
Yeah.
To be like, well, how can we involve them? How can we know that? You know what I mean? And so, I think even a caregiver said the other day that her husband actually has the same thing as Sarah.
Right.
And I know that something with sort of lesser known illnesses is sometimes that's hard. Like if you say cancer, everyone's like, oh, cancer. Right.
Right.
But it's hard when it's a more invisible illness or an illness that isn't as well known. And so
there's a lot of misunderstanding around it, maybe. Yeah. Right.
Yes. Yes. And she said that her husband sort of stuck up on her behalf to her in-laws, and who were sort of like, why is she freaking out about this? And why is she like advocating for masks and da, da, da. And he said, if I had brain cancer, nobody would be batting an eye. But it's because I have this that anybody's even thinking about that. And she just said like for her to hear her husband stick up for her to her in-laws, but to also explain what it is that she's doing and why, she just said like, it just was so beautiful.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's an interesting piece too, even being seen by our person. And Sean will do that too. Like sometimes he'll be like, well, yeah, we just went through this really hard thing, or Allison did this thing. And so for him, I mean, he's wonderful at that. But just like sometimes I think caregivers aren't seen by the person they're caring for. And sometimes that could be a whole other episode. But sometimes the person who's being cared for doesn't want to acknowledge that their person is caring for them. And so that can feel really unseen. Right.
Right.
I think even the other day, my brother sent me an article. He's like, I saw this article in the newspaper about caregiving and thought of you and sent it to me. So even that kind of thing, like the thought that like, he knows that's part of my role and saw it again, thought of me and sent it to me. I mean, it took him 30 seconds.
Yeah.
But it felt seen to be able to be like, wow, my brother gets it. Like he gets that this is part of my reality. And it's going to share that with me. Yeah. I think too, I keep seeing this meme or graphic, whatever, that says like, this is my love language is, and it's all about COVID still and just flu and RSV. And it's like quotes like, we'll be masked when you come over, or we'll all test before we see you, or let's meet outside. And I think that's another thing too, is like, even before Thanksgiving, a number of my relatives were sick and they all let us know first.
Yeah.
So that we didn't just show up and then be like, why is everyone coughing? Everybody sort of let us know, which acknowledges like, you have a different situation and this coughing might impact you differently. And we see what that means for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we think about, let's like play out the dominoes again.
Yeah.
And so in this situation, let's do the other one. So like, let's say you're back at your gathering.
Yeah.
And somebody says, wow, Justin, like I'm sure it took a lot for you to be here today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that like you had to do a lot, like to prep to make sure that Sarah was okay while she was at home, and that your mind might be there, and like that it took a lot of energy for you to be here, and that when you get home, you might have some repercussions because you were gone for a couple of hours and all of that, and we just want to acknowledge that and thank you for being here. Right? Then what?
Yeah, I think like on the one, like just right off, there's like an exhale. Like whether it's some wall or something falls down to where it just feels like a more comfortable place. Like one thing that I know that I am not good at, and I imagine other people are not good at, is whether it's some sort of gathering or you're running into someone and they ask how you are and you say, oh, I'm fine. And we did a whole episode on that.
Yeah, we sure did. Yeah.
But if someone leads with something like that, where like really acknowledging your situation, like that makes it so much easier for me to respond with how I'm really doing. And that makes such a big difference in like how I feel in that situation. Like I feel more comfortable to share that because it feels like you're acknowledging and you're understanding, and like you're taking the lead on kind of starting the conversation or allowing it in. And maybe I don't want to get into it, and that's fine too. Yeah. But it removes some of that friction, because I think for me as a caregiver, and I imagine there's others in this situation, it can be a hard thing to talk about for all sorts of reasons. Yeah. But if we don't share what we're going through, then other people can't know. Yeah. And if other people don't know, then we're not going to get support that we need. We're not going to get the acknowledgement that we need to feel seen. We're going to continue to feel more isolated, and that just goes down that path. Yeah. And so to feel like it's a safe place to maybe it's just dipping the toe in a little bit of vulnerability. Like you don't have to unload everything on them. Yeah. But it opens that door. And I think that can make a huge difference for the long term of feeling like you have people and spaces where you can be honest about what's going on. Yeah. And then people know what you're dealing with, and hopefully have a better understanding of how they can be supportive and help. Sure.
Yeah. So you just kind of dominoed that whole thing out for us. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I mean, if you feel more comfortable, you're more likely to get support from them. You're more likely to probably come back. Yeah. Right. So to stay connected, to reach out when you need help, you feel less isolated. Earlier in our other example, you said that you might start to question your role and the importance of your role. But if someone says, wow, this must have been really hard, you're like, oh, wow. Okay. You know what I mean? Like your role is acknowledged and
validated. Yeah.
Validated. Yes. Thank you. And so, I mean, it's a whole different path that you just went down based on this comment. And something I love about that comment is there wasn't even a question mark in there. Right. So you don't even have to say anything. It's not even that then you have to say like, well, yeah, I am feeling really, it's just, oh, wow. They just took all the work they did. I don't have to explain anything. They clearly get me and acknowledge me, so that I don't have to, if I don't want to, say like anything, which is kind of beautiful. But I can, the door's open, right? But it's not putting that spotlight on me to answer a question if I don't want to. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So that like 15-second phrase can send a caregiver down a totally different path. Yeah. Long term. So I think if we sort of summarize some of the ways. So one is acknowledging things like, this must be hard. You must be tired. It took a lot to get here. Yeah. Sort of the acknowledgement piece.
Right. I appreciate that you were able to attend in spite of everything that's going on. Or like, after the fact, like we missed you. If you weren't able to, that's one we didn't touch on. If you weren't able to attend something and someone reaches out like, hey, we noticed that you weren't there and we missed you and wish you could have, but we understand.
Yes.
Why you weren't
we
able
understand.
to. Right. Something like that, where it's not a guilt thing, like, oh,
Yes.
we missed you being here, but it's like, that feels good to hear that after the fact.
Totally. Yes. Yeah. So those pieces, doing some like research behind the scenes. So like research on the illness, or I've often talked about, like, I have a friend who used to like read my Caring Bridge thing back in the day before we showed up, so that I didn't have to update her. She was like, I'm all up to date. And I always try to do that with people who have those, so that they don't have to spend their energy on that.
Yeah.
Making donations to those places, inviting, but with the option of opting out, even sending things like articles, making sure people know that they're thought of, just like, hey, I saw this article and I thought of you, or hey, I'm just thinking of you today. No need to respond. Right. I want to make just a quick plug too, is that like the whole theme of my caregiver gift boxes is that like is of them being seen. And so, the items in it, you might just on first glance be like, oh yeah, those are just like gift box items. But the thing that usually makes people cry is that when they read the letter,
right?
Because the letter inside says, here's a meal bar, because caregiver, I know that you're going to have a time that you're going to be in the hospital and you're going to make sure they got fed and you haven't. Right. That's being seen. That's like, oh, this isn't just a meal bar. This is a meal bar because you see me and you get me, right? Every item in there has a reason like that. And so that's what really hits people. And so if you're a supporter and you're like, I'm not good with words, that I don't know, an easy way is, I have caregiver gift boxes. They now come in 2 different sizes, 2 different price points. So you could, send, let me do the hard work of the words and send a gift box to someone so just go to thenegativespace.life and look for caregiver gifts. But I think there's just a lot of these are pretty simple, right? But as we've described, pretty simple, yet they can have a really important long-term impact in making caregivers feel seen.
For sure.
Yeah. In addition, that one I mentioned too about the, like, when you hear people talking about someone who has a new diagnosis or is going through chemo or whatever, to bring up in the conversation. Yeah. I wonder who's caring for them, or I wonder how can we support their caregiver? Just to get people to start thinking in that mindset. So anything I forgot that you want to add?
No, I think that's good. I think, also we didn't really touch on it, but just, all of the ways that you can show up and support and help out a caregiver, whether that's, hey, can I drop off a meal on Tuesday? Do you have any dietary restrictions? That kind of thing. Or just those, hey, we had a windstorm. Can I rake your leaves in your yard? That kind of stuff where someone is acknowledging that you've got a lot going on, whether or not they're, by offering to help, they're acknowledging that. Yeah. And like, those are ways too. But I will add that I think the words mean a lot. Yeah. And so add some of that with your offer for help, just that acknowledgement that we've talked about here. Because yes, the help is great, but I don't know, words are really powerful. Yeah. Yeah. And the absence of words is also powerful. Yes. In the other way. Yes. And so, just let them know that you see them, you acknowledge the role that they're in, the difficulty that's there, and that it goes a long way. It's a disproportionate response that a caregiver can have to those seemingly small words.
Agreed. Absolutely. Yeah. One last thing I want to add is to think about things like holidays, right? So to do extra acknowledgement around holidays, which can be challenging, and around like anniversaries of things. Yeah. To be like, I know it was this time last year that your person passed away, or is this time that this year, you know what I mean? Those types of things. So it's, or if you're in a smooth moment, right? Yeah. Like if you and I are both in sort of quote smooth caregiving moments, that doesn't mean it's not hard. And so for people to reach out and say like, I know things are going really well, and I just want to acknowledge that your day to day is still more complex than most. And so I just wanted to say, I'm thinking of you, Yeah. 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 Good. Listeners, if you can just take even one tiny thing, it's all about the ripple effect. So if you can take one tiny thing from today and send one little text message to someone, you don't realize the impact it's going to make. So it's worth the time and effort that it will take on your part, which is pretty minimal. So yeah. Good. Oh, thanks for this talk.
You're welcome. It's been really good. Thank you.
It has been good. Yes. All right. I hope that the TMS continues to go well. And and we'll check in about that and other things next time.
All right. Sounds great.
All right. Talk to you later.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.